Eldritch Blast is the king of Baldur's Gate 3. This Sorlock build turns Will and any Warlock and Sorcerer into a force damage god with insane damage numbers each turn, plus the ability to cast multiple Eldritch Blasts per turn. Let's go! Let me know if you prefer multi-class builds like this, or if you prefer a vanilla one-class only build in the comments down below. But before we get into that, this video is sponsored by Honkai Star Rail. Honkai Star Rail is the latest RPG from Hoyoverse, the creators of the excellent Genshin Impact. And I've got to tell you all about this game, because if you love turn-based RPGs, then this is definitely one to check out. You'll explore different worlds across the universe in this free-to-play galactic fantasy game, and the gameplay really stands out to me because of that turn-based nature, but also the character and the art design. Hoyoverse has nailed the art style in Honkai Star Rail. Each character has so much life and personality, especially the new Imbibitor Lunai, who reminds me of myself, you know, being tall and handsome, with a lot of dragon-like features. No, can't see it? Well, despite his quiet and noble demeanor, he oozes self-confidence as a powerful imaginary type DPS character, and he can manipulate the flow of water to attack enemies. Personally, I'm just getting into Honkai Star Rail, and I can't wait to check out Imbibitor Lunai and the 1.3 update, which is out now. Check out the pinned comment and the link in the description to try out the game and Imbibitor Lunai for free right now, but also use the promo code in the description for 50 Stellar Jades. Thank you, Honkai Star Rail, for sponsoring this video. So playing as this Sorlock build, we are essentially combining the Warlock and the Sorcerer to create an Eldritch Blast focused build. So basically what you'll do in sort of combat is each turn you'll cast Eldritch Blast, and with the Eldritch Evocation modifiers, it adds an insane amount of charisma on top of that. Plus we're also wearing two particular pieces of gear, one to increase our charisma up to 22, and one called the Potent Robe, which will add Gregarious Caster, so you can additionally add your charisma modifier again to your Eldritch Blast. So essentially you'll get a just insane amount of damage off with every Eldritch Blast, especially as you level up and hit level 10, when you can do 3 beams of the blast in the one attack. And by combining this with the Sorcerer, it allows you as well to use meta magic, especially meta magic quicken spell. So in the same turn you could cast Eldritch Blast as a bonus action and then cast it again as an action. So essentially you cast it twice in the one turn, meaning 6 beams, meaning just insane amount of damage overall, really, that you can do with this build. So while we are leaning heavily into Eldritch Blast, and it's absolutely the focus of this build, it's not the only thing you can do, and it's partly why combining something like a Sorcerer and a Warlock together is such a natural pairing. Now, they do share a Charisma spellcasting modifier, so all of their spells will use Charisma, so you just want to maximize your Charisma, but also because of the Warlock with their Warlock spell slots, they have a limited amount of spells, and they do replenish on short rest. And being that they are so restrictive, combining it with something like a Sorcerer gives you access to normal spell slots, plus a wider array of potential spells that you can use for different scenarios, but also you get the meta magic and the sorcery points that we discussed. So it just gives you more flexibility as a, let's say, as a Warlock, right? And gives you newer things that you can do, while also enabling you to deal heaps of damage with Eldritch Blast, which we've already talked about, but giving you more flexibility, which is something the Warlock severely lacks. If you are just playing a Warlock, you often feel like you stand there and, you know, mostly do nothing other than cast Eldritch Blast. So let's build out this character. Now I have a Warlock and a Sorcerer class guide, which you can go and watch if you want the very basics for both of these classes, but we're just going to cover up the leveling up process, and we're going to use Will, but you can obviously use your custom character here. So you probably want to put your first levels into the Warlock specifically. Now initially, because Eldritch Blast just at the start of the game is also very good, and it also helps you sort of be serviceable and strong in the early game before you get too complex into changing the way your class goes, but also getting to level 4 will allow you to get a feat, which we can talk about in a little bit. But when you're picking a subclass here, the Fiend is probably the best one to go because of Dark One's Blessing. So when you kill an enemy, you gain temporary hit points, and because you are going to be killing enemies like basically every turn, you always get those temporary hit points. At level 2, as a Warlock, you'll gain your Eldritch Invocations, which we want to grab Agonizing Blast to add your Charisma modifier to Eldritch Blast, and Repelling Blast, which will then knock enemies back when you hit them with the Eldritch Blast. At level 3, you'll get a pact to choose from. This could be the Pact of the Chain, the Tomb, or the Blade. I would suggest to go Pact of the Chain here for the Find Familiar, and so you can summon a familiar, and you can actually use them in combat or outside of combat to fly around and pull levers for you, but it sort of doesn't matter that much, right? Like, you could go anything. Pact of the Tomb gives you access to some more spells, but we won't use them heaps because we'll be using either Sorcerer spells if we're into that route, but it gives you options there. Your other 8 levels should be go into Sorcery. Now this gives you all of the spell slots, the meta magic, and the sorcery points that we discussed, plus your last couple of feats. For your subclass as a sorcerer, the Draconic Bloodline is definitely the way to go because you get a little bit of extra health, plus it increases your overall armor class, and as we're not wearing armor, that's very useful for this sort of a setup compared to a typical Warlock setup. For your Ancestry, I would pick a type based on spell damage that you like. So I typically like fire damage, so you can go say the red dragon type, or if say you want to use cold, you could go blue, something different. Depends on what sort of other damage spells you want to use, because at level 6 you get an additional modifier that spells of that type do additional damage. So just pay attention to that and make sure as you're leveling up your sorcerer, you're picking up those spells as well. For your feats here, we are just going to really go into ability improvement to get your charisma to 20. We're going to get it to 22 via a headpiece as well. So we'll hit that 22 mark, but you can spend that last feat at level 12 on sort of anything you like. Really, it's really up to you. We'll quickly go through some great spell options. We've already talked about Eldritch Blast, and you are definitely going to be using Eldritch Blast basically every single turn. But your Warlock spell slots, you can grab Hex and Misty Step, I would suggest. So Hex is great because it allows you to add necrotic damage every time you deal damage to that target. And if that target dies, you can then move it without consuming another spell slot for the act of a bonus action. So you can do this to add necrotic damage to any of these attacks that you do. And once you have hit, say, level 10 and your Eldritch Blast is 3 different beams, and you hit that target with those 3 beams, each beam will trigger the Hex effect to deal extra necrotic damage, further increasing your overall damage. And Misty Step is great just because you can, then move around and sort of be a bit more flexible into your positioning, get up on higher ground, that sort of a thing. And I like picking up both of these in the Warlock spell slot specifically, rather than picking up Misty Step as a sorcerer spell, which you can do if you choose to go that route. But picking it up this way, because it synergizes a little bit better, because you've only got the 2 Warlock spell slots, right? And then having Hex and Misty Step as your 2 Warlock spells that are also both bonus actions, it just helps that sort of rhythm to know that these are Warlock spells. They're both bonus actions, and you can sort of cast them, in that turn. And then because your Warlock spells refresh after you short rest, which you'll do basically after every encounter, you get your Hex and your Misty Step back, so you can reposition and then get that extra damage every single combat encounter, regardless of how many spell slots you have left from your sorcerer line. And for your sorcerer line here, the spells that you should grab really is anything that matches your Draconic Bloodline. So in this example here, I took Cold, so Ray of Frost, Ice Knife, and Ice Storm are great, but it's up to you depending on the damage type you pick. I would always pick up Counterspell, however, because not only is it an incredible information giver, as it tells you what spells are about to be cast before the target casts them, you can use it to counter their spells. Obviously, it's called Counterspell as a reaction. And because as this Sorlock build, we don't use our spell slots very often, you can basically use this all the time and consume that spell slot to cast Counterspell, because we're not using those spell slots to just like cast damage spells unless under certain circumstances we do, but for the most part, we're using Eldritch Blast. And then as you are leveling up as a sorcerer, you do get to pick meta magic options. Now there's 2 that you absolutely should pick up, and then it's up to you otherwise. The first being Twinned Spells, so spells that only target one creature can target an additional creature. This is fantastic, so then you can, use something like Ice Knife, say for example, to hit 2 different targets. Quicken Spell is also an absolute must, so spells that cost an action to cast only cost a bonus action instead. This is what allows you to get Eldritch Blast off twice in the single turn as well. Now this does cost 3 sorcery points to cast, so it is expensive, but because we're investing a lot more points into the sorcery line, we'll have more sorcery points overall, so it's not as expensive, but it's just worth calling out. And for your last sort of meta magic slot, we're not cutting it, we're just going to roll with it. So I would suggest to either go Careful Spell, so allies automatically succeed saving throws against spells that require them, or Distant Spell. So Careful Spell can be really useful if you're casting, say, big AoE spells that require saving throws and your allies are in that space. You can sort of save them from it for free. And Distant Spell just gives you that little bit of extra range, which can be useful for certain encounters, especially as you get further in the game, that are set in quite large environments. So definitely something to consider. There is 2 pieces of must-have gear that you need to grab. Now, I am going to be very careful with spoilers here. So the first is the Potent Robe. Now, the main reason to wear this is because of Gregarious Caster, so your cantrips deal additional damage equal to your charisma modifier. This is obviously great for Eldritch Blast because it adds that additional charisma modifier, but it's also fantastic for anything, right? If we use Ray of Frost as an example here, we're getting the benefits from our Sorcerer Draconic Bloodline to increase the overall damage of cold spells, plus then adding the charisma modifier just adds so much additional damage to that as well. Now, this comes from Act 2, and I'll tell you exactly where in a second, but just skip ahead to this this timestamp on the screen if you don't want to know exactly where, but it comes from completing the Rescue the Tieflings from Moonrise Tower quest. Once you've completed that quest, go to Alfira in the Last Light Inn and hand in the quest, and she'll give you this robe. And the next piece is Birthright. So Birthright just adds +2 charisma, and that's how we get our charisma to 22, meaning we get +6 to our charisma modifier. So when combined with that robe, it adds +6 to your overall cantrip damage. Plus, you know, we've already discussed with the Eldritch Blast and how you get the Eldritch Invocation to add your charisma modifier as well. So that then adds that as a +6. And this comes from a location in Act 3. And again, skip to the timestamp on your screen if you don't want to know exactly where, but it comes from Roland in Sorceries Sundries. You just need to go there and trade with him to be able to buy this. He also sells a great pair of gloves that give you the quicken spell effect that can be used once per short rest, which you can grab as well if you want to juice up this build a little bit more. Some final tips for this build. We already discussed how great Hex is, but make sure you're casting it every encounter and then moving it to targets when you have defeated them. You can obviously use Misty Step to reposition. One thing to note is here to be careful with your Repelling Blast, as you can knock enemies back or knock them off ledges into the unknown abyss and lose that sweet loot because the corpse is gone. So just be careful where you're blasting enemies to. And also, because we're not necessarily using your spell slots to actually do something in combat, you can use them for other features, like say create sorcery point. Once you've run out of sorcery points, say you've been pumping out quicken spell, you need more, you can use that outside of combat just to bump that number up so you don't have to long rest. Or you could just be using them for counterspell in combat, which we already discussed. So there are other ways to consume those spell slots if you're not actually using them in combat. Let me know your thoughts on this build down in the comments below. Thank you Honkai Star Rail for sponsoring this video. Thank you for watching this video till the end. Thank you to our members for supporting the channel. My name is Norza, and I hope you have a great day.